We, as officers, and I'm sure you probably heard it too out there in the public or on social media or whatever, but we've all heard the public make such comment. The cops lock them up and the judges turn them loose. How do you respond to this perception?
There is, how do I put this exactly? There is unfortunately some truth to that, and there's not a knock on the judges. There are realities in this world. It would be wonderful if every single criminal could get caught and punished, and punished severely. Yeah. But we just simply don't have the resources. We don't have the police. We don't have the prosecutors. We don't have the court time. Yeah. We don't have the prison space to be able to lock up everybody. So sometimes what we have to do is almost, to use the medical term, triage. Yeah. We have to decide what's the most serious case. I mean, they're all important. Right. Because if you're a victim of a crime, that's the only one you care about. Absolutely. But we have to communicate with victims in cases like this to explain to them, to make sure that their expectations are not so out of touch with reality that they're going to be furious with the outcome. We have to take all of those elements into account in processing the cases. A lot of times there are police officers in many cases that will do a process called stacking charges. Yeah. They will load up a defendant with every conceivable charge that they can come up with, realizing that prosecutors are probably going to dismiss some of them, maybe knock one or two of them down a level or two to get down to the nub. But what that does in many cases is give us some negotiating fodder. Yeah. It is not a game by any stretch of the imagination, but there is some game playing in it, if that makes any sense at all. Right. And we take it very seriously, but there also is give and take. Yeah. It is an adversarial system. Sure. That's the way it's designed. Yeah. Doesn't mean we're enemies. We all are working in the same process, but we are on opposite sides of the fence, the defense and the prosecution. It's just like with anything else. The Rolling Stones said it, you can't always get what you want, and that is true. That's true. You're not going to be able to, we have to take what we legitimately can get sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes that's a disappointment, sometimes it's not. Yeah. But I think that statement that the cops lock them up and the judges let them loose, that's way oversimplified. It is a nice bumper sticker philosophy. Sure. But as with all of those bumper sticker philosophies, there's a heck of a lot more behind it that is a lot truer than the bumper sticker. Absolutely. That's absolutely a good point. Warren, speaking of public perception as it relates to current events now. Oh, boy. It seemed to me, at least, and specific to the Ferguson situation, on some levels, all of that rioting and whatever arose out of a basic misunderstanding or complete lack of knowledge of how the justice system actually works. As the protesters in Ferguson and later in other cities nationally are seen to demand justice, quote unquote, even after the grand jury had convened, heard from all the witnesses, saw all the pertinent evidence, and found no cause to indict. Yet some of the protesters rioted, looted, and burned the city due to some perceived injustice. Can you please give us an explanation of exactly what the grand jury is and what its function actually is in the justice system and what's specific to that case? Well, let me just say before I start on that, Scott, there is a seeming mania almost in popular culture these days that we take a ready, fire, aim mentality. Yep. We will decide, here are the facts without any facts. Yes. This is the end result, and then we'll look, the media in many cases will look for information that will lead us to that conclusion they've already made. Right. They'll ignore a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah. And the problem that you've got there is that officer in Ferguson, for example, his life is ruined. Yeah. I mean, he'll never be able to get a job in law enforcement again. The Duke lacrosse players, that case, 15 years ago, 10 years ago now, I guess now. where there was the false accusation of rape.
Yeah.
And the DA ironically ended up going to prison.
Yeah.
Because of abuse of power that he had in that case, and the downright corrupt activities.
Sure.
You saw it with the allegations of rape that Rolling Stone did
Yeah.
at the University of Virginia.
Sure.
They just seem to go off on weird tangents without much evidence.
Yeah.
And forget that there are human beings involved
Yeah.
in cases like this. I can't quite put my hands around why lawyers get up in front of a microphone before a case goes to court. There are canons of ethics, ethical considerations that we all have, especially as prosecutors.
Right.
We are not allowed to make what are called extrajudicial statements, or statements outside of court, that would tend to inflame passions or to make it hard for somebody to get a fair trial. I try to avoid speaking with the media except to give them public information.
Yeah.
Before a case starts. Now, once the trial's completed, I'm happy to talk with the media.
Sure.
My boss certainly would be.
Yeah.
He is a big believer in everybody getting the facts, but do it the right way.
Yeah.
When you see prosecutors getting up there and throwing accusations around just simply because they've gotten a criminal charge, that doesn't fly.
Yeah.
They are breaking all kinds of rules, and I'm amazed they haven't had sanctions brought against them. That being said, the prosecutor in Ferguson, once the grand jury had returned its decision
Yeah.
and decided not to bring any charges,
Yeah.
I'll explain that process in just a minute, but he then got up, and I thought it was one of the best civics lessons I had ever seen. He explained exactly what the process was, what kind of evidence was presented. We realized once the prosecutor laid all that stuff out, that a lot of the things that had been reported as fact by the media
Yep.
simply were not true.
Right.
We saw that as far back as O.J. Simpson 20 years ago.
Yep.
You had a lot of speculation and supposition that were ironclad fact,
Right.
as far as the media were concerned, and were just blown out of the water
Yeah.
once the light of truth was shined on them. Same thing happened in Ferguson.
Well, the hands up, don't shoot.
Hands up, don't shoot is
a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a complete falsehood.
Never happened.
Did not happen.
Right.
But it became almost a mantra.
Yes.
And it's like the Nazis or the communists or whatever. You tell the big lie often enough, and ultimately it will become the truth.
Right.
That's what happened there. Essentially, the grand jury is normally going to be used after an arrest has been made.
Yeah.
There is a constitutional right to have for a person charged with a criminal offense to have have his case presented to a grand jury.
Yeah.
The states and the federal government all structure their grand juries in a certain way, but their basic function is to act as a screen, as a filter.
Yeah.
Police make cases, or information comes to the grand jury, and they have to decide, is this case court-worthy?
Yeah.
Is this case strong enough? Does it merit going forward and taking up court time?
Yeah.
And if the grand jury decides no, it doesn't, they will issue what is called a no bill. If they decide yes, it does, they will issue a true bill,
Yeah.
and then we can take the case into court. Now, can somebody plead guilty without a case being taken to the grand jury? Sure.
Right.
They can waive presentment. That happens not a lot, but it happens more than just a little. In Ferguson, they had a different method of employing the grand jury. Now, we can do this in South Carolina. I've seen it done once or twice, but it's very, very rare, where you use the grand jury as an investigative tool. Instead of having an arrest, you gather all the facts, you present them to the grand jury, you tell the grand jury, now, based on those facts, let me give you a few laws.
Yeah.
And you can talk about a law of murder or manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. And you can lay out all that information to them. Here are the facts as we've determined them to be. Here is the law that we believe are applicable. What do you think? Do any of them apply? And the grand jury in that case said no, none of those. That is why No charges were ever brought.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, you had what I consider to be an extraordinarily politicized federal Department of Justice.
Yeah.
They conducted an investigation as well.
Right.
Same result. So clearly the people in Ferguson, the officials in Ferguson did it right.
Yeah, right.
That drove me up the wall.
Me too. And I don't understand. And they're still rioting out there.
Yes, they are.
What are they mad? My question is, what are you mad about? Everything. And how do you perceive this as some injustice?
And what is
when the justice system absolutely works?
Yeah. What do you want? Do you want somebody to be prosecuted just for a show trial?
Yeah.
We don't have a court of public opinion that carries any weight.
Right.
I don't mean to sound sacrilegious or anything, but it was the court of public opinion that crucified Jesus.
Sure.
It wasn't fact.
Right. Exactly.
It was people yelling, "Crucify him."
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what they wanted to do to the police officer there.
Yeah.
They wanted to crucify him. Facts be damned.
And it's maddening.
Yes.
It's
infuriating.
It is. Let's bring it a little bit more local. We recently had an incident in Charleston where the police officer, Officer Slager, was videotaped shooting Walter Scott in the back as he ran away. Did it seem to you that SLED made charges rather quickly in that case? I mean, it was within a couple of days.
Yeah.
That he was charged and with murder.
Mm-hmm.
My question sort of here is do you think, first off, do you think murder was a proper charge?
You know, I almost hesitate to say because I don't have access to all the facts.
Right, of course.
Again, I'm going on what the news media have presented to us,
yeah.
And that, as we have seen on numerous occasions, is a dangerous path to take.
Yeah.
But having given that caveat, let me just tell you, there are reasons that police officers can use deadly force.
Yeah.
Now, 30 years ago, there was a law enforcement practice called the fleeing felon rule.
Yeah.
If you had somebody that had committed a crime and was fleeing from law enforcement could use whatever force was necessary in order to apprehend the person, up to and including deadly force. Didn't matter whether the person constituted a deadly threat or not. That's why in the old gangster movies in the 30s and 40s and even in the 50s, you would have this getaway.
Yeah.
You know, you would have the gangsters fleeing in the car
Yeah.
and maybe shooting back at the police
Right,
and
with
the
the
police
Tommy guns,
leaning out
yeah.
the windows and shooting back.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing we're talking about with the fleeing felon rule.
Right.
Well, in the mid-'80s, there was a case called Tennessee versus Garner, and you had a burglary, a break-in at a house. Police officer responded, burglar came racing out of the house, ran by the officer, ran away. Officer drew his gun, and this was, again, in accordance with police policy and the law, and the state law. He drew his gun, said that he did not think that the fleeing suspect was armed, said he probably was not, but he shot him in the back and killed him. Well, the case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, look, that's a seizure of a person, so it's going to be a Fourth Amendment question, unreasonable search and seizure.
Right.
And we don't think it's reasonable to use deadly force every time. So we're going to limit police officers pretty much to the way average citizens are.
Yeah.
Only if they see a case where there might be a deadly threat or a possibility of serious bodily injury to the officer or a bystander. Only then are we going to allow deadly force to be used. I don't know what precipitated the chase. I mean, the guy ran apparently from the traffic stop.
Yes.
Okay, that happens.
Right.
The officer chased him down. He caught up with him. I'm not sure what happened before the bystander started taping.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly that was a pretty interesting event to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have started the video.
Sure.
But from what I saw,
Yeah.
when you've got a suspect who's empty-handed, as far as we know, I don't know of anything that happened that could have been considered a deadly threat. Just because the guy ran did not give the officer carte blanche to open fire on him. It did not create open season. And under those circumstances, there wasn't any justification for the shooting.
Sure.
So it probably was a criminal homicide under those circumstances.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. I can't, as a police officer myself, put it together in my head how it's a good idea to shoot basically an old man.
Yeah.
Who's running away
He's younger
from,
than I am, Scott, so he's not that old. But.
Well, older than the officer who was running away.
Yeah.
Empty-handed.
Empty-handed.
To me, that I can't put that together. But again, we're just knowing what we've seen in the few minutes of video.
Exactly. And we're not talking about a rapist or a robber.
Yeah,
or
it's child support stuff.
It was child support and traffic stop.
Right.
So none of that would give you an indication that he was a deadly threat to the community.
Right.
I don't know. That's the problem that I saw.
Yeah.
I think the officer may well have gotten frustrated and may well have just lost it.
Yeah, and just to tag that a little bit, there has been some discussion that's come since then. The individual may have had come into possession of the officer's taser. That's what is being bandied around now, and there may have been a struggle over that.
Again, that may well change the entire complexion of the case. But based on what we have seen, based on what we have been told, it
just looks bad.
Yeah, it doesn't look very good for the officer.
And my second part of that discussion or question to that discussion would be, do you think SLED decided to file murder charges as quickly as they did as a preemptive measure against the Ferguson type situation here in South Carolina?
That would mean that they were throwing the officer to the wolves, and I don't think that happened.
Yeah.
I think they based on the video, you can take a look at it and make a determination as to whether or not there was any justification or excuse.
Yeah.
And again, you got to realize it's a completely different. I know you know this, but just to make sure everybody else does.
Yeah.
There's a completely different standard of proof for making an arrest in a case than there is for a conviction at trial.
Yeah.
All you need is more evidence in favor of a proposition than there is evidence against it.
Yeah.
Make it more probable that this occurred than that occurred. So probable cause is all you needed to make the arrest. And I based on the video itself and based on the other information that they had, apparently, I think there was definitely probable cause.
Yeah, certainly.
That a criminal homicide had occurred.
Yeah.
So, no, I do not think that SLED tossed anybody to the wolves.
Yeah.
I think they took a couple of days. A couple of days apparently was all they needed.
Yeah.
They did have the benefit of the video. If we'd have had a video in Ferguson, we'd have known exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Instead of relying on the autopsy reports, whichever one of three that they had.
Sure.
But those took time.
Yeah.
So people want instant gratification, and that's just simply not going to happen every time in a criminal case.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it did come very quickly in this particular instance.
Yeah, that was the benefit of the video.
Right. Yeah.
I think that helped law enforcement or the investigators to make a determination as quickly as they could on this.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. But the flip side of that coin is that, you cannot build a case on 15, 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute of grainy, out of focus video, out of context.
Out of context is the key phrase there.
Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We don't know what happened before. We don't know exactly what happened after.
Yeah.
And we have been fed this one little hors d'oeuvre by the media.
Sure.
And we are expected to make a meal out of that.
Yeah. And it's just, with this constant media coverage of this stuff, it's scary for me as a police officer.
I don't blame you.
Just because of the fact that no matter what you do, you're going to be videoed. We all accept that. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But it's the out of context stuff is really an issue, because you can take something that happened in a heartbeat.
Yes.
But there was a lot leading up to that heartbeat.
Exactly.
And that's what's scary for us, because you're always going to justify your action.
And I will also tell you, there's a lot of discussion now about body cams for police officers.
Yeah.
Not the most recent, but one of the most recent cases I prosecuted, it was a murder, and there were body cams. We had 2 of them. We would have had a third one, but it malfunctioned. It wasn't working. The 2 body cams that we had, they weren't that helpful.
Yeah.
They were doing what they were supposed to be doing, but they were jerky. They were all over the place.
Yeah.
They weren't focused. You could hear things, better than you could see things.
Right.
But even hearing them, there was a small dog that was frantic and barking its head off.
Yeah.
And you had to listen for the words with that distraction.
Yeah.
And a witness that was there that was screaming. So all of that noise, you had to filter all of that out to listen for key phrases or words or questions and answers. You couldn't see much. So anybody that thinks that body cams are going to be the panacea for all these problems is deluding himself.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. But however, I do endorse the body cam
I do
stuff
too.
because I
I
tell
do
you,
too.
our agency, Lawrence Sheriff's Office, was actually one of the first, if not the first, in the state to adopt those.
And it was Lawrence Sheriff that had him in these cases. I'm just saying, they're not the cure-all.
But no, absolutely not. And that's the thing, too, because I know the ones that we have used in the past, and I think a few of them are still in current duty, have no night vision at all.
Yeah.
You know, so if it's dark, you get a black picture, but with a lot of noise.
Well, and it's funny. I've got a friend of mine that's a lieutenant with the Charleston Police, and this was back before the thing in North Charleston happened. It was not the same agency at all. He showed me a video that he had prepared to present to Charleston County Council about or Charleston City Council, I'm sorry, about getting their officers body cams. And they had them with night vision, and they had them just regular light and, switching back and forth. They had about 3 or 4 different brands with different modes on them. And some of them would be useful. He showed you the same scene, somebody standing in the shadows at night. With just regular light, you couldn't see the individual. With the shifting modes, kind of going from night vision to regular, as the person came out, it just was, the electronic confusion was incredible. And then the night vision gave you a completely skewed view of the way things were. It looked like things were well lit when in fact they weren't. So that also is going to create a problem. Defense attorneys, God bless them, they do their jobs, but even if there are body cameras on every police officer that record everything, they're gonna find a way to try to invalidate it or make the jury disbelieve what they're seeing. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? It's just that's the way they operate. That's
their job.
That's exactly the way they're supposed to work.
A couple of quick things, and we'll wrap up here, Warren. I appreciate you spending this much time with
Scott.
me.
This has been a blast.
And I do appreciate it. Just this week, Warren, we had another riot situation that's currently going on right now
in Baltimore,
as we're taping this interview. But in Baltimore, to the point that a state of emergency had to be declared, with the governor of Maryland calling the National Guard. For this stuff. And again, it's for another perceived police injustice. But what I found out about this particular incident is that not one piece of evidence has been presented by anyone on either side as to how Mr. Gray was injured and subsequently died, other than the fact that he happened to be in the police custody at the time of his death. Does the reaction of the people in Baltimore seem appropriate, especially considering how little we still know today?
Scott, what amazes me is that when you see the looters going into stores, we talk hear commentators talking about their expressions of rage. I don't see anybody looking too mad. I see them with an armful of goods with a big grin on their faces. They're just simply looting stores, and they're destroying their own livelihood. Detroit has never come back from the riots in 1967. It's ironic. Baltimore still has swaths in the city where, it used to be one of I think it was the 4th or 5th largest city in the United States. It is hemorrhaged population because this kind of stuff could happen. Who in his right mind is going to open a store in that area now just to watch it burn? Anything like this? This is not civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is what Martin Luther King preached, and that was peaceful resistance. This is rioting. There is nothing civil about this.
Criminal activity.
Yes. That's absolutely correct.
And another thing that was interesting to me about it is that the constant mantra is the police are out of control. They've lost their minds. They're just raging animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all the video or all the footage you've seen coming out of Baltimore, and there's been a lot of it. The cops are standing stone statue.
Yep.
They're not moving. They're holding their shields and standing still while the public is going nuts.
Yep.
So
Burning buildings, and the one thing you see with the police is rocks and bricks bouncing off their riot shields.
So who is out of control here?
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you.
It's how we got to this point, Warren, is really shocking to me, and it's actually quite sad.
Yeah,
You know,
there's no doubt.
It really is.
There's no doubt. There is absolutely nothing. A demonstration is one thing.
Yeah.
We have a right to
Absolutely.
assembly. We have a right in the First Amendment
Yeah.
to petition for what is called a redress of grievances.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Sure. That's
You can
yeah.
you can do that peacefully. You can do it forcefully.
Right.
But free speech does exist.
Yep.
But you are not allowed to slander somebody.
Right.
You are not allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
You are not allowed to say, "Let's go kill cops."
Yeah.
That is not free speech.
We saw that this week also.
Yes, we did.
The girl on Facebook.
And she got arrested, which she richly deserved.
Richly, I agree.
I am a big free speech advocate. If
Yeah.
you want to express yourself, that's fine, but you do it within the bounds of civilized society.
Yeah.
You do not go to this extreme. The kind of thing that they are doing up there is nothing, absolutely nothing civil about it.
No, not whatsoever. I guess my final question is, how do we come back from this? How do we get back to being somewhat normal and to where people can do what you just said in a proper way without it becoming every time a 13-second video hits the internet, you know, a town gets burned?
I hate to say it, but everything comes to education. Until people can learn to think for themselves and not just be mind-numb robots,
Yep.
are going to blow with the wind that is created by the hot air of some of these speakers.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can change that. We have to learn to think for ourselves and not simply be zombies.
Yeah.
In some cases, just operating at the behest of the loudest voice.
Yeah, that's a great point. And with that, I think we'll end it here. Do you have any final thoughts before we call it a day?
Always a pleasure to be with you, bud.
Warren Mowry, again, I greatly appreciate you coming on, being a part of the program. We went an hour and 15 minutes in this interview, so this will probably be a two-parter for the show, but I appreciate you so much and great insight. A lot of this, and the reason I want to interview you, Warren, is because you don't get a lot of this. You get a lot of talking heads who've never done what we do, telling us what we should have done.
Yeah.
So for us to sit down, and my profession as law enforcement officer, you as a profession as a solicitor, I think this needs to happen more than just some people on TV again telling you what to think.
Scott, one of the things I greatly believe in is I'd rather have my heart operated on by somebody that's actually done it before than somebody that's already that's only read all of the books about it.
Sure. Yeah.
So doing something a lot the way we do
Yep.
gives you a lot of insight that you'll never be able to get from any other means.
Yeah. I agree.
So
Thank you so much, Warren Mowry.
my pleasure, bud.